I have to add my welcome to all of you, my welcome to Las Vegas, my home of 30 years. That's a long time, and I've seen a lot of change. And in fact, this is my fourth Clean Energy Summit. Very hard for me to believe. And in each instance, I find that it is more intriguing, more exciting, and I'm even more delighted to be here. I want to welcome you to the future. This panel has it all. They built it. In fact, they built it and you came. You can write on it. It's going to take you to the future. I want to remind you that this panel in particular is all about consumers, providing you with information and the tools that you'll need to make some very important decisions going forward. Let me offer a little bit about the flow. Our panelists are going to provide individual presentations, and then we're going to go into what I hope will be a very robust Q&A. And then you have the opportunity to participate. This year we're using social media, a little Twitter. I'm looking for you to tweet some questions, and there will be instructions for you provided on the monitors. Let me offer a quote that I hope will sort of help frame the discussion. Never trust anything that can think for itself if you can't see where it keeps its brain. J.K. Rowling. Another, for a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. And finally, when it comes to the future, there are three kinds of people: those who let it happen, those who make it happen, and those who wondered what happened. I am now prepared to invite our first speaker, our first panelist, Mr. Jesse Burst. Mr. Burst is an expert on the smart grid. Mr. Burst, are you prepared to come forward?
Thank you for the chance to be with you and talk to you about this better future that we're moving into, this amazing transformation that's taking place all over the planet, this bigger than the internet business opportunity. And yet it's one that we've been noticing in bits and pieces. We notice the solar energy or the electric vehicles or the smart grid, but we often fail to grasp it in its entirety. We are reinventing electricity. We are remaking it top to bottom, how we make it, how we use it, how we deliver it. Now, this is the electric power infrastructure that has been called the most complex machine on Earth. The National Academy of Engineering named the electric power infrastructure the crowning achievement, the single greatest engineering achievement of the 20th century. So think about that. That's the century that put a man on the moon. That's the century that gave us Hoover Dam. That's the century that gave us computers. That's the century that gave us the George Foreman grill. And yet, amongst all those achievements, the electric power infrastructure was selected as the greatest. And no wonder, because of the amazing difference it made to our lifestyle. Just think about, if you can, imagine life before electricity. It was dark and dim and dingy, and it was dirty and smelly, and it was difficult and inconvenient, and it was often very painful as well. And then came electricity, and in literally just a few decades, it really transformed it, and it created a lifestyle that literally is better than royalty was able to achieve in the centuries before. In fact, it was such a profound impact that in 1905, only less than 25 years after Thomas Edison brought forth electricity 1.0, they put up this great building to commemorate the World Fair and to celebrate man's greatest scientific achievements. And they wrote this inscription on the front to keep it safe and fair for everyone. And we have similar decisions to make again today. And this time it's not just about a better standard of living, it's also about a better standard of working, because electricity is increasingly the foundation for our future prosperity. I'd like you to imagine that first electricity 1.0 transformation in the days of Edison and Tesla and Westinghouse and the Pearl Street Station, and realize how impactful every choice and decision was that they made. Their choices reverberated for decades. In fact, we are still living by some of the decisions they made more than 100 years ago. And then to realize that we're in another situation just like that again today. The choices we make in these next few years will determine our path for decades to come. We've got to figure out the right standards, the right business models, and the right new policies to propel us into this better age. We're reinventing electricity, how we make it, how we use it. We're using it much more efficiently. What we use it for, we're electrifying our transportation. We're going to electrify our transportation, and thanks to cheap microwaves, cheap microprocessors, cheap motors, cheap lasers, every day we invent new ways for electricity to make our lives better. And we're reinventing how we deliver it. And this is my home. I live in the smart grid space. You see, Grid 1.0 was not keeping pace. It was invented in the age of Edison. It was designed in the age of Eisenhower. It was installed in the age of Nixon. And really, until the last few years, we did almost nothing for it. We just lived off the trust fund, and now the trust fund is running out. Imagine the difference in power between the adding machines of the 1950s and the data farms, the server farms of today, in terms of that amazing power difference, and the difference between a princess phone of the 50s and the smartphones we carry around today, or the difference in power between a turboprop of the 50s and a stealth bomber of today. And then consider the difference between the substation of today, of the 50s, and the substation of today. Okay, I'm being a little sarcastic, but nonetheless, we have this joke in the industry that if Thomas Edison came alive, he'd be able to recognize and work with and operate the electric power grid. Now, what would it say if Orville and Wilbur Wright could come alive and jump in the cockpit of a 747 and fly it around? It wouldn't say much about the progress of that industry. So what is this Grid 2.0? It's very simple. Smart devices, smart communications, smart software. And you know what? We've done it before. We've done it with cable systems, set-top boxes talking over coax to smart software in the head end. We've done it with cellular, smartphones talking over the airwaves to smart software, and we're doing it in the smart grid again. And we're bringing many of these technologies that we've done when we built all these other networks in the last 20 and 30 years. And when we do that, what we get is a grid that's more observable, controllable, and self-healing. Or observable, for the first time, we can actually know what's going on. I'm amazed at today's power system operators because they're flying blind. They don't have the visibility that these other networks have. It'll also be more controllable. For the first time, we'll be able to say with precision when, where, how much power goes. And more self-healing. For the first time, equipment will on its own isolate problems, route power around those problems, and restore power automatically. We've got some great examples already, and these are cities that are not just doing a smart grid application here or there, but they're building the foundation upon which they can layer more and more great energy efficiency and other beneficial applications, just as we build applications over and over again on top of the foundation that is the internet. And we can do this affordably. We've got to build it out anyway. We need to spend nearly $1 trillion just to keep up with demand over the next 20 years. When we have to buy anyway, let's buy smart and make sure it can communicate and we can begin to link these things up. The cost, about an extra large pizza per household per month. Because you see, we've entered the electricity economy. Look at this chart here. In 1950, 20% of our gross domestic product was directly dependent on electricity. By 2008, it was already 60%. That's before we electrify our transportation. We have entered an era where access to cheap, reliable electricity is going to be the barometer of national advantage, just as in the previous century it was access to cheap petroleum. We've entered the electricity economy, and the world is not waiting for us. Sweden is 100% smart meters, Italy is 100% smart meters, and New Zealand is 100% smart meters. China is on a 5-year program to install 330 million smart meters, and they're ahead of schedule. So I'll just finish up this way. Electricity 2.0 is a legacy, just like these other legacies, like the railroads that Secretary Chu mentioned to us, authorized by Abraham Lincoln, completed in 1869, or the interstate highways, authorized by Dwight Eisenhower, begun in the 50s, that created millions of new jobs, or the internet, authorized by Lyndon Johnson, started in 1969. Where would we be today without the jobs created by the Googles and the Amazons and the Qualcomms and the Ciscos? And where will we be if we don't have the jobs that will be created by Electricity 2.0, if we let those jobs flow elsewhere? And you know, it's not just about this country. If the world was a village, 18 of us, if there was 100 people in the world, 18 of us would not be able to read. 14 of us would live on less than $2 a day. 20% of us would have no electricity at all. Getting those 20% electricity and getting the rest of us to Electricity 2.0 is the greatest single business opportunity of this century. So I'll end with this, and I apologize if you heard this story, but I think it applies. A carpenter has worked for the same developer for 30 years, and he's ready to retire, but the developer says to him, "Will you just build one more house for me?" And the carpenter grudgingly agrees. He doesn't really want to do it, and he cuts corners. He does a very sloppy, shoddy job. He takes the money the developer gives him for the high-end first-class materials, and he substitutes second-class materials, and he pockets the difference. And he's almost ashamed as he hands the key to the developer. It's probably the worst house he's ever built, and the developer hands the keys back to him. He says, "This is your house. This is your reward for your 30 years of service to me." We are going to rebuild and remake our electric power infrastructure in the next decade, and it behooves us to remember that this is our house. We're going to live here. Our children are going to live here. So the decisions we make today in these formative years are going to have effect and impact for decades. The delays we take today will hold us back for decades. We've got to do it right, and we've got to do it right now. So I hope you'll become enthusiastic advocates for Electricity 2.0 and for the policies that will make it possible, such as those enumerated by Secretary Chu today. I hope you do that for the sake of our economy and for our environment and for our energy and national security and for the sake of the better lifestyle it'll make possible. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, Rose.
Our next panelist is Roger Platt. Mr. Platt is the Senior Vice President for Global Policy with the U.S. Green Buildings Council.
Thank you, Rose. So why is a green building policy geek here, and what do I have to say? Well, in very summary fashion, let me just tell you, I'm here to say that there's a huge amount of waste going on, and in transforming that waste into a new generation of green buildings, we can produce a lot of very good jobs. That's kind of my message in a nutshell. Let me try to drill down on that a bit. What's all this waste? Well, it's wonderful, and Jesse did a very good job of explaining the wonders of electricity, but we use electricity in our buildings and to power our buildings, and buildings represent about 70% of our electrical energy use in this country, and about 40 to 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So they're big users, and that in itself is not so shocking, but when you think about the fact that we spend about $400 billion a year generating all of that, and using all of that energy, and about 30% of that is just horrendously wasteful, horrendously inefficient use of energy. So about $130 billion that I'm sure we could do something much more useful with than just wasting it in how we run our buildings. So you have this opportunity, and $140 billion, just to give you the flavor of that, the entire state budget for Nevada is about $20 billion. So $130 billion is not chump change, and if we were to invest it in the kinds of jobs that we would want to see our children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews have, that would be very, very good news. But the better news is that just taking care of that energy efficiency problem, fixing it, is going to give us a huge opportunity to create jobs at the same time. So let me give you the flavor of this with the building sector. We have a sector that's very slowly improving its efficiency. About 11% since 1980 for commercial buildings, 22% for office buildings. It's slow, it's steady. It's actually a little better than our efficiency in our new cars, but it's still way too slow. So what we've been trying to do at the U.S. Green Building Council, and what the Energy Department has done a spectacular job of doing as well, is to try to create demonstration projects on a scale where people cannot ignore the fact that you can build buildings that are radically more efficient at the same cost or less than traditional buildings, and you can get at this big problem of waste, but you can also do it through retrofitting existing buildings. Now, the demonstration project that we're engaged in, and this building is part of it, is 10,000 buildings around the world, about 129 countries now committing to build similar types of buildings that meet the LEED standard for green building performance. The sheer size of the building stock, homes and commercial buildings that are using radically less energy, creating better indoor air quality for their occupants than most Americans breathe outside. That is a very, very encouraging signal, and the speed at which that kind of green building is accelerating is also impressive. Every day at the U.S. Green Building Council, we certify 1.5 million square feet of commercial space to our standards. That's the equivalent of about 3 Empire State Buildings a week. The numbers are impressive, the excitement around the globe is impressive, but it's still a very small percentage of Americans that get a taste of this kind of future. Now, it's not just wealthy folks. About half of our homes that we certify are affordable homes. As I say, most of the buildings are existing buildings that are being retrofit, so they're not all shiny new buildings. But what we need to do is to look at this taste of the future and figure out how we're going to expand it. It occurs to me that when I think about where we are with buildings, it reminds me of the very cool thing that William Gibson, the noir prophet of the cyberpunk subgenre of science fiction, who came up with the word cyberspace, he very famously said, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." Now, how do we make sure that we accelerate the progress and give more people a taste of that future? And one way to think about this is to think about the kind of revolutions in innovation that we need. And Jesse referred to Thomas Edison coming back from the grave and finding out that that some of the systems are the same ones that were set up during his lifetime. I think if you brought Thomas Edison back again to talk to me this time, and if you showed him this device or any smartphone that any of us have First, you have to show them the very cool light that Senator Reid showed him, because that would really blow him away. But next, show him our phones. And you could explain to him that the telephone and the telegraph, the movie camera and the movie, the record player and the records, all of which he had a substantial role in perfecting as technologies, fit in the palm of my hand. More records than I'm sure Thomas Edison was playing on his early Victrola. That is a revolution that involves so many cycles of innovation, so many new industries, so many new jobs. And yet, just like if you showed him some of the electrical plants, if you took him to most buildings, they would be a lot more the same than they were different from his era. And that's the problem that I see as also a great opportunity with green buildings, because the one area where we are seeing innovation of a kind that is very, very impressive and that shows a real understanding of integrated design and the opportunity to transform lots of complexity into simplicity is around green building construction and renovation. And this building is a tremendous example of that. The CEO of MGM will, I hope, give you even a further guided tour. Let me quickly say that this building created jobs. New technologies were designed especially for this building and are now available to all Americans. This building every day saves the equivalent of 8,000, taking 8,000, enough energy for 8,000 homes in Nevada, enough water saved for hundreds and hundreds of homes. It's an inspiration, and it's also it also leads me to sort of the punchline of my talk, which is, what are we going to do working with Senator Chu, Senator Reid, Obama, others that truly get it about this, and the many Republicans and people in the business community that also really get it about this to make things happen? Well, there's very, very good news, which is that in Washington right now, there are people that do get it about the importance of energy efficient and green buildings. The President himself has announced a Better Buildings initiative, which encompasses a whole bunch of policy ideas that make tremendous sense. Just to give you the flavor of it, right now, if I have a very wasteful business, I waste huge amounts of energy, I will get a bigger tax deduction as a business expense for all that wasted energy than the company that doesn't waste so much energy. We need to figure out a way to create tax incentives to actually do the right thing and build the kinds of buildings and renovate the kinds of structures that I've been talking about. There's a whole bunch of other things that we need to do, but there's good news here, and I want to just quickly point out that this is a bipartisan issue. This is an issue where there are people that are building buildings like the U.S. Green Building Council is encouraging, and they're not just the headquarters for the Bergenstock-wearing Sierra Club members. I was very impressed recently to find out that in Kentucky they have the first 2 zero-energy schools, and also a fundamental religious group that's building the Creationist Museum, in which they're also rebuilding Noah's Ark to biblical specifications. They're building it to biblical specifications, but also to LEED standards. So with that, I want to leave you with some good news, and thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Jim Motivale. Mr. Motivale is an environmental writer, journalist, and all-around big thinker. Jim.
It's great to be here. I wanted to start by mentioning something that ties in with the last 2 speakers. How many of you here have heard of the concept of V2G, or know what that stands for? Well, some of you do. It stands for vehicle to grid. And the idea is that your car, your electrified car, your hybrid or your plug-in hybrid or your battery electric car, can actually give power back into the grid, back into buildings. And we're seeing the first experiments with that. And some of the Clean Grid 2.0 people are experimenting with it and trying to get it to work. And you could actually have people getting paid for allowing their car to be plugged into the grid and providing power during peak load times. And when you think about it, you want a holistic system where cars are integrated with the whole clean energy system. This is how it's going to work. Cars will be a lot smarter than they used to be. And let's take a look at how that works. If we could have the, yes, okay. Well, we've had a bunch of false starts with electric cars. If we look at history, we see a lot of times when electric cars were very promising and might have had a significant market share. If you go back to 1900, the first auto shows, there were more steam and electric cars on the road and in the shows than there were gasoline cars. And you think about it, you understand why that was, because the first gas cars were very noisy and smelly, and you had to crank them, and it could take your arm off, and electrics were plainly superior at that time. But we had the development of the self-starter for gas cars. They got quieter, they got better, and no one had any idea that the tailpipe polluted. It really wasn't until the 50s and the 1960s that we had a concept that the smog we were seeing in places like Los Angeles was actually related to car exhaust. It's hard to believe that, but it's true. All right, in the modern era, we've had false starts also, and this is the GM EV1. You've probably heard about it. It was the first battery electric from a major manufacturer in like 30 or 40 years. And it unfortunately flopped on the marketplace, and you could talk about a lot of different reasons for that, whether GM marketed it properly. But a lot of it had to do with technology. The EV1 had lead-acid batteries when it was introduced. It had a range of like 60 or 70 miles, and it only seated 2 people. So only about 1,000 of these were leased in a several-year period, and it's a failure by any account. And it was the second false start. Also, some of the legislation that California had enacted no longer supported electric cars, and gas prices got lower. As we'll see, gas prices are a big driver for the adoption of electric cars. Now let's move into the modern era. You've all seen this car. It's the Tesla Roadster. It's $109,000, and about 1,800 of them have been sold, which is pretty good for a supercar, and not many of us can afford a vehicle of that size. But this is the first electric car on the market in the modern era. And it starts off the bat with lithium-ion batteries. This is what you will see under the hood of every modern electric car. The drawback is they're pretty expensive, and with a $109,000 car, you can have a $30,000 battery pack, but it's difficult to do in conventional cars. It's hard to make a $20,000 electric car. So this is the first one. It came out in 2006. It was first shown in 2006. And I really think that Tesla Motors and Elon Musk caught the public's attention. This car is undoubtedly great to look at. It's sexy. It's 0 to 60 in less than 4 seconds. I mean, what is there not to like about the Tesla Roadster? So I think the enormous amounts of attention given to this car really helped pave the way for the more practical electrics that we're seeing now. And here are the 2 first ones on the road now, the Nissan Leaf and the Chevrolet Volt. Both of these are on the market now. They've probably sold 10,000 Leafs around the world and maybe 4,000 Chevy Volts. But the numbers are pretty deceiving because they're based pretty much exclusively on production constraints. The companies are not able to get up to full capacity. Nissan was dealt a blow by the Japanese tsunami and earthquake, and is still not totally recovered in terms of producing Leafs. It's safe to say that all the cars that are being produced are being sold, so you can't really look at the sales numbers and make any conclusions from that. But the people who have them say they love them, and you have to understand that if you look at these 2 cars, the difference between a plug-in hybrid, which is what the Volt is, and a battery electric, which is what the Leaf is. The Leaf has a range of about 100 miles. The Volt has a range of about 400 miles. And I talked to Jay Leno recently, and he loves the Volt. He has a Volt. He's not so sure about the Leaf because he thinks 100 miles isn't enough. And we'll get into whether it is or isn't. All right, since we've got these first two Vanguard cars out, we've also got a whole complicated grid of startup companies that are putting electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids on the road. Some of you may have heard of the Fisker Karma, and that's just coming out now. In fact, the first one was delivered to none other than Leonardo DiCaprio. I think the second one is going to Al Gore, and the third one is going to Colin Powell. So it's an all-celebrity roster so far. And this is a plug-in hybrid, sort of along the lines of the Volt. It's also very sexy, very fast, and very expensive. It's another vaguely $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 car, depending on how you get it equipped. And it's a plug-in hybrid with a range of 300 or 400 miles. I think it'll probably do very well. We also have winners and losers already. If you look at that very interesting-looking three-wheeled car that looks kind of like an airplane without wings, that's the Aptera 2E. That company has been struggling and hopes to get a Department of Energy loan, but it just returned deposits to its depositors, and it's not in production yet, so we'll see what happens there. We got the tiny and scrappy WeGo Life, which you see, I think it's the middle one in the top row there. That company was started with $5 million. The car is made in China, based on a Chinese model, and the company has 5 employees, and yet they've managed to put out an electric car and get it on the market, and you can buy it today. We have the Coda, and I think we have Coda car. The Coda sedan is out in the lobby. You should take a look at that. That's about to come on the market. Maybe they'll give you a timetable. And we have a whole lot of other vehicles that are coming on the market soon, and there's a bunch of pluses and minuses from what we can see. And there are some of the plus factors there. Global warming and peak oil are a big driver. Reducing CO2 emissions, getting to zero emissions, as you do with a lot of cars, are really an important driver. And the cars are fun to drive. You'll have a lot of fun driving these. There's instant torque. They're very, very quiet. And pretty soon you'll be able to charge them up in half an hour. Here are some of the cons. I think some of these will be an issue. The cars are expensive. As I said, the starting point is probably about $30,000. And I think someone could do very well if they got an electric car on the market for less than that, or maybe $20,000. Everyone would buy it. We may end up leasing batteries to people. And then you just buy the car, but you lease the battery, and that might be a way to get lower introductory prices. So the future, it's very interesting. There's a bunch of road maps out there. It's unclear which ones will really prevail. Will we have 10% of the new cars on the road in 2020? Will they be electric? That's about what I see, if you include hybrids in the mix. Combination of hybrids and battery electrics are probably going to be 10% of the new vehicles on the market by 2020. The president has a goal of 1 million plug-in vehicles, including hybrids, on the road by 2015. If you look at the rollouts lists of the car makers, you can see how we might get to that. It's a very ambitious goal. President Obama has put $2.5 billion into helping electric vehicle battery startups, and that's why in the state of Michigan we have quite a leadership role there. Because otherwise, if you listen to Secretary Chu, he made it very clear that we will lose this market to China if we don't act very quickly. So the big question is, will EVs succeed in the marketplace? And I think they will if we understand the importance of greening the transportation sector. It's critically important that we do this because if you believe at all in global warming, and it's sad to say that if you look at the American people, there's a shrinking contingency for that viewpoint. But if you believe in global warming, if you believe in peak oil, and I believe in both of those things, then you get very concerned about the future of transportation because business as usual is not really possible under that scenario. So the Electrification Coalition sees that by 2040, 75% of all miles on the highway could be electric miles. That's a very ambitious number, and it depends on a lot of government regulation being instituted, a lot of things going right, but it is quite possible that by 2040, electric cars will be the norm. So thank you, and we'll talk later during the Q&A.
Our next panelist is Chandra Brown. Chandra is a principal with United Streetcar and Oregon Iron Works. Welcome.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. I am here from rainy Portland, so I can tell you I love 100-degree sunny weather. It is beautiful to be here in Las Vegas, and I'd like to thank Senator Reid and all the sponsors and supporters here for allowing me to come and talk about my favorite subject, U.S. manufacturing. That is what I am here to talk about today. And you may say, why is U.S. manufacturing important? What are we doing here? Well, let me tell you. I'm going to give you 3 pretty quick statistics on why I think U.S. manufacturing is important and critical to the clean economy future. 1, innovation. One of the things our company's founded on. Why are we competitive? Why do we do a good job? Because we innovate. Right now, manufacturing is responsible for 70% of all private sector research development and 90% of all American patents. Some surprising figures. Another one, indirect job creation. One of the big reasons I love about manufacturing is I want to create more jobs. I want to hire more people at my companies. So how do we do that? Well, one way, it just happens naturally. For every 1 manufacturing job, creates 2.5 jobs in other sectors on average. So, that's a nice statistic, a decent return on your investment. Now, if you're talking about high-tech, advanced manufacturing, which most of the clean economy is based upon, well, then you create 16 jobs in other sectors for every 1 manufacturing job. Now, creation of job, that's great, right? Good return on investment. But we need to create good jobs, livable wage jobs, jobs that can support a family, not minimum wage. So the other factor I really like about manufacturing is that manufacturing jobs pay 21% more than the average jobs. 21% more, that's a pretty big statistic. And they supply, in general, better benefits, whether they be pension, health care, kind of across the board. So we think manufacturing, very important. Now, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to give you some pretty concrete, I'm a practical gal up here, I'm going to give you some pretty concrete examples using what I know best, which is my company, and how we have made the transition from a traditional manufacturing company into a manufacturing company that is also looking towards clean energy and the clean economy future. So we're already quite diverse. As you can see, we build boats, we build bridges, we do aerospace, hydroelectric, nuclear, marine. But the 2 I'm going to focus on today is both streetcars and wave energy. I would be remiss, you can see some pictures of folks working. Obviously, our employees are our backbone of the company. We're hiring. We like welders and fitters and machinists, as well as engineers and designers. The streetcar program right now has about 30 dedicated folks doing the design work, and then we have hundreds of folks in the shop that will be manufacturing these cars. The other important thing about 26% of the clean energy economy right now is based on manufacturing jobs. It's already a huge percentage of what we're doing. So what did my company do? Well, one of the things we did is we thought that livable communities and transportation and energy are inherently tied and were going to be a big growth industry. So we looked around. Portland had streetcars, was the first city in the United States to put in a modern electric streetcar. Back in 2000, they started running. And I loved the streetcar. I rode on it, and I said, wow, this is so great. Turns out None were built in the United States, not one. So he said, well, that's ridiculous. This is a growth industry. This is critical. There's 50 cities right now looking at modern streetcars across the board. We're building 13 cars right now. We're building cars for Portland and Tucson. We're competing in Washington, D.C., Cincinnati, Ohio, Seattle, Washington. So when we found out that they weren't built here, we said, well, that's ridiculous. These guys are skilled. These men and women can build anything. So we embarked on building the first streetcar, and we built the first modern streetcar in almost 60 years, right here several years ago. And that's a picture. The Made in USA one is the prototype. Well, thank you. Yay. Now, as much as I like to come up here and talk about, yay, Oregon Iron Works, United Streetcar, we all know the reality is that's not what it's about. What I love about the streetcar story is it is the story of the creation of an industry. We took manufacturing jobs from Eastern Europe and brought them back to the United States. But guess what? We're like a big metal fabrication plant. I don't make windows. I don't make cable harnesses. I don't make seats. There's lots of things in a streetcar we don't make. We have to integrate them and make sure they all work. But as you can look at this map, this is just a small sampling of one car, the first prototype car we built, and you can see some of the major vendors across the United States. One streetcar, over 200 vendors, 20 different states. Some companies who had never produced parts for a transit vehicle before. Next, kind of skipping ahead to one of our renewable energy programs, wave energy. Right now, we are building one of the first commercial wave energy devices in the United States. It's going to be deployed next year off the southern coast of Oregon. You can see, I like pictures, so you can give you a little bit of idea of scale. The model's in the middle, and our build is next to it. That device, 140 foot long, 40-foot diameter, the bottom heave plate, and weighs roughly 220 tons. That is a large piece of metal. So you want to know, how do you change your company? How do you move forward into the clean energy economy? I'm going to give you a very simple equation, not rocket science. We build boats, lots of boats for the military, boats for other customers. So boats are large metal structures that float. Wave energy devices, large metal structures that float. So we had all the skill sets, all the inherent technology in our highly skilled workforce to be able to build these next generation energy devices. Wave energy, it's very nascent stage right now. So we're hoping that that'll increase and go better in the future. But this is one of the first ones, and we believe eventually, since waves are consistent, very different, there's no intermittent, it's near the population sources in general on the coast, less transmission, that it'll be a viable path to the future. Okay, so what do I recommend? Some of these things are pretty basic, and I'm going to really hook on two in my last few seconds. One is increasing the transparency and accountability of Buy America. We think Buy America is very important to U.S. manufacturing. We think it's critical. Department of Transportation, the American Recovery Act did a great job with tying things, if you're using U.S. dollars, to be built here in the U.S., if at all possible, and to be a job creation mechanism. So we think Department of Energy, for example, and some of the other agencies should follow the example. We should have a comprehensive Buy America policy. Right now, Department of Transportation does a fantastic job. Recovery Act did a great job. So we would hope to use those types. One economist said, if you had a concerted domestic buying program among the federal agencies, right there you increase manufacturing by 33%, which is great. That's what we want. We want to increase the overall GDP based on manufacturing. We also obviously think we should continue investments in R&D, retooling facilities, establish a national renewable energy standard. And finally, my last final point will be transportation, energy, tied together, very tied together. So we encourage people to think, too, the transportation and infrastructure bill, we need a 6-year, fully funded bill. And that's going to help all the transit and the other works that are tied together, because transportation and energy are inherently partners. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions later. Thank you.
Quick point of personal privilege. You are sitting in one of the most remarkable accomplishments that we've seen in many years. City Center is the largest sustainable hospitality center in the world. And it is my pleasure now to introduce one of the hosts for our summit, the chairman and CEO of MGM Resorts International, Mr. Jim Murren.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Is this kind of a nice spot? Are you having fun here? You know, it's kind of hard for me to believe that we are here today. It was but 2 years ago, less, that we actually opened Aria and City Center. And I want to reflect upon that for a second first, because you're in a resort that's operated by over 8,000 of the best hospitality executives in the world, that's part of a team of 10,000 people that work here at City Center, that's part of a team that has 50,000 men and women that work here in Las Vegas for us at MGM Resorts, that's part of a global team that has 62,000 people. The men and women here at Aria that create the environment that you have today are here today because we were able to finish this project despite the global recession, despite the financial crisis, and open it up at the end of 2009, creating the single largest job creator in that year, in 2009, and a man that's very much responsible for helping me do that is Senator Harry Reid, and I'd like you to help me thank Senator Harry Reid. So people ask, Jim, you're a Republican? Yes, but I'm a Nevadan first, and I know how important Senator Reid has been to my state of Nevada and into the broader effort of clean energy, which is why I'm also very happy to be here. Now, we know Las Vegas is the hospitality capital of the world. We do this very well here. People come, 40 million people a year visit us, our guests at our resorts. We have 10 of them here in Las Vegas, and they enjoy themselves. They're known for having a little bit of fun, maybe a little excess, and yet I think that that is actually the theme of today. How do we limit excess? How do we remake Las Vegas and reimagine what this valley can be and what the state can be? Can we make Las Vegas the hospitality capital of the world, also the capital for innovative thinking, of biotechnology and technology? Can we diversify our economy in a very special way? And as the largest employer in the state, I can tell you that I'm very invested to do that. I want to take you back to 2004 because that was the year that I first came up with the concept of City Center. And I thought at the time that we can do something more here. As beautiful as the resorts are, and we own many of the best, I felt that we can move the area of design, the area of hospitality to another level. And I was first struck by the fact that you may or may not know this, that I'm not in Las Vegas. In fact, Las Vegas is a few miles north of here. And therefore, I was struck by the fact that the Strip is not a city road, or a county road, or state road for that matter. It's actually a federal highway. And I've been struck by the fact that these resorts were designed, literally built and designed, to fight one another, not only thematically, but from an egress perspective. And I really felt that we could do something very different here. So the first step of City Center was to come up with a very smart urban plan to reduce the vehicular and pedestrian distances that people need to travel. And that was the first cornerstone of the idea of sustainability here. I also felt, as all of us did at City Center and at MGM, that if we brought cutting-edge architecture here, they can extend our boundaries of knowledge of sustainability. We didn't really know what that meant back in 2004 and 5, but Cesar Pelli did, and KPF did, and Raphael Vignoli and Daniel Lieberskin and all the great architects and designers that we employed, we told them, you know, imagine, we'll fund it. Remember, this was in '05. Just come up with whatever you think about. We got the money, and let's build something. We also felt that if we're going to do it right, we had to take care of where we were. And in doing this, we had to recycle and reuse everything that was in this campus. There were over 60 acres here. We recycled almost everything that was here. We gave a lot of it away: vanities, glass, beds, furniture of the old hotels that were here. And we reused a lot of the waste material. In fact, we reused 93% of everything that was on this campus. And we took that as a call to arms. And today I'm very proud of the fact that my company recycles 33% of all its waste here, which is better than twice the state average, and we're only getting going. Oh, thank you. I also feel, and what I'd like to talk to you about for a moment, is that how can we learn from some great successes around the country? How did Pittsburgh reimagine itself, or Denver, or San Diego? Why can't we do a lot of NOV that wants to be very engaged and is expert in this area? And we have people that care. And one thing I can tell you about Las Vegas, living here as long as I now have, is that we're a very resilient group of people. We took whatever the recession could give us, and we didn't give up, and we didn't give in. And as a result of that, 10,000 construction workers kept working through the recession here. And what they learned about sustainability and design, we're now sharing with the world. What we learned about materials, the carpet you see on the floor, the wall coverings, the paint, had not been done before in a resort community. What we learned about water conservation, because of course we live in the desert, and why do we ignore that fact? So what you see in terms of conservation of water in our desert landscaping, which we believe to be beautiful, is also an example of the world. And what we learned also downstairs when you walk through ARIA is we learned that air displacement systems are a good idea. And we had to, in that case, literally innovate. So when you're wandering around the slot machines after the conference, hopefully maybe sit down for a little while, notice the fact that you're not seeing air coming down in a forced air system from the ceiling, but in fact, we're delivering the air to all of ARIA downstairs from the floor. Of course, that's more expensive, cutting through the slab, more expensive in almost every way, but we're delivering air at around 63 degrees instead of at 54 degrees from the ceiling. We're saving energy, we're creating a cleaner environment, using physics as our friend, and it's creating the way that we're going to build in the future. One of the last things I want to say, and I think the most important really, and I believe this and I lived through the recession at MGM, I do believe that a crisis creates an opportunity. And we have a crisis on money fronts. In this particular case, I live in a state that's too dependent on one industry for its economic health. My company represents about 13% of the entire state budget here in Nevada. In fact, that's a little cocktail trivia for you. I don't think there's a company in the US that represents a bigger percentage of one state's budget. The gaming industry, as an industry, is over 40% of this state's budget. Why haven't we diversified our economy already? Why can't we do that? And now I believe, given the lessons that we've learned here, some bleeding edge work that we did, but the demonstration of resiliency with a great federal government helping us here and a great state government, I think we can do that. And I believe 2 years less than when City Center opened, what City Center represents, really more than anything else, is a beacon of resiliency and hope. It is a place where men and women work, that men and women come and play and enjoy themselves. It is a place that would not have existed without the collective courage of so many people, but it is a place where people now can come and learn from what we did here in the area of sustainable development And I promise you, as the CEO of this company, that everything we do in all of our resorts around the world is based on a sustainable design and operation, because it's not only the right thing to do, it is also proved here in other places that we operate, it's the right business decision. Thank you very much.
So now we're going to move to our Q&A. I am really interested to see what you've done with social media. Seems that we may have something here. Let me see. Panel, as you get your seats, I'm checking to see what we have. I thought I might see a question about jobs. I don't see them. Maybe we can flow up some more. I thought I might see something on economic development, diversification. Well, maybe they're coming. So, is that, yes, that was a hint. It was a hint. It seems that we don't have the technology that we were looking for so that folks can, in fact, participate in Twitter. I promised that we would tweet. Chris, I know you hear me back there. Okay, well then I have to go to my standard questions. First off, let's give a warm thank you to our panelists. Chandra, during your presentation, you mentioned the Recovery Act. I know it played a role in your advancement of your technology, but give me a sense of what works and maybe a sense of what some of the challenges were.
Excellent. Well, we are a big believer in the Recovery Act, and I know a lot of folks sometimes talk about how pro we are for some of the federal spending efforts. But you know, one of the things I didn't have time to mention is the level of private investment we do. So basically, for every dollar of federal investment, you should be getting a very large return on that. So when you talk about things like the Recovery Act, one of the areas where I think it was incredibly successful and how you can tell its success is some of the programs were incredibly oversubscribed. So for example, a Tiger grant, it's just transportation. What they had is a certain amount of money, and there were over 50 times the amount of applications. And these are incredible applications with a return on that investment, sometimes 10, 20, 30% more. So it isn't just job creation, it's actually, as you know, building the nation's infrastructure, which makes the trucks go faster, the buses and everything else, congestion go down. So it's a win-win-win, kind of a triple win. Some of the areas, though, that could be improved is obviously you really have to hone down, and I, as a private business owner, I like the federal government to look at things on what is the return on investment. There's lots of ways you can spend money. If we're putting in $1 of federal investment and you're only getting $1 of private match, that doesn't seem like a good return on investment for me. However, if you're putting, $1 in a transportation and infrastructure investment and you're getting $500 out and creating jobs and helping the economy as a whole go, I think that's an excellent investment. So they need to be more focused on how they are investing the limited resources and give you a return on that investment.
Okay. So I do have some information for you as we move forward. As you pull out your phones, you are to type the numbers 22333. And then in the message field, N as in Nancy, C as in cat, E as in Edward, S as in Sam. NCES. And then you can develop your question. And the most important thing for you to do is to then push send. Jim, you are widely credited as the visionary. Your presentation gave us, I think, a great sense of what City Center is all about. But in your capacity as the Chief Executive Officer of a large publicly traded company, what kinds of recommendations would you have for other CEOs who are interested in pursuing sustainability?
Well, Rose, the key to developing any good program is communication, I think. And we started at the board level. Many companies have done this, but as you know, we created a corporate social responsibility board committee at the MGM Resorts board. And if it stopped there, then we wouldn't get our message out to the 62,000 men and women that work for us. And so we're pretty good at training. We train in multiple levels. And what we have done is we've set up green teams throughout our company, both at the properties and at the corporate level. We have invested a lot of money in education on this area with our employees, and they in turn have invested of their time and of their intellect and of their enthusiasm. And it's part of the daily training that we go through here at MGM. So the first step would be, if you stop at a board level or a senior management level, you've failed in this effort. You have to bring it down into the broad company. That's number one. The second is you have to work with the community. And I really believe that companies, when they embark on endeavors such as this, if they don't reach out into the community and have a strong outreach effort, they've lost a great opportunity. And I'll give you one example. We have quite a bit of beautiful art here at City Center. I'm pretty proud of it. And there was a reason why we commissioned the pieces that we commissioned. And one of the pieces that I'm particularly fond of is over the ARIA front desk here. It's Maya Lim, who did the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., and many other wonderful pieces. If you look downstairs, when you go downstairs, look at the Colorado River that has been made by Maya Lim out of recycled silver, reused silver. And one of my great joys is I get to give Clark County school kids docent tours around City Center about once a month. And I brought these kids, they're about sixth graders, to that particular piece, and I asked them, what do you think the artist had in mind when she conceived of and created the Colorado River? And the young lady looked at it and she said, well, maybe she thinks that water is more valuable than silver. I said, done, we're there. We have accomplished something from a standpoint of trying to express a point of view that our most precious resources are the ones that we seem to be ignoring or abusing, and water would be one of the examples of that. And so I think that both in training internally, making it part of your daily life at a company, but most importantly, the education outreach into the community, I think, is vital.
I like that. I want to segue then to you, Roger. I need to know from your perspective, we've been talking about the built environment and what we can do, but this clean energy future, is this really something that every American can participate in, from school children to our basic consumers here represented?
Well, Jim has done a very good job of highlighting how his commitment, his company's commitment, has made and has touched so many of the 10,000 people that are working here and educating them. And projects like this, not that there are projects quite like this is the largest mixed-use sustainable development project in the world to receive LEED certification. The project itself is an inspiration. It is fair to ask, and people do all the time, about this question. I love I think the byline for the tagline is the nature of luxury. And this place is full of some of the most remarkable efforts to protect nature, but it's also full of luxury, and that's great. And think back to the time when we, people at least with white hair like me, would think that, wow, only really, really wealthy people get to talk on the phone in their cars. Or only really, really wealthy people get to watch first-run movies in their own homes on the early VCRs or whatever. My sense is that many of the things that make this project spectacular from a luxury standpoint, those will be and should be protected as luxury assets. But I think much of what they're doing to protect the environment here, to create extraordinarily efficient fixtures and high air quality, these are things that increasingly are and can be ubiquitous technologies. Already, half of the LEED homes that we certify are affordable homes under various government interpretations. Already, most of what we certify are existing buildings, so they're not necessarily the spanking brand new. And most of the schools that we certify, and we certify hundreds and hundreds of schools, are public schools. So there is a diversification in who's getting a taste of the future. I just think we need to accelerate that.
All right, so you used the key word, future. Jesse, I have to ask you this because we talk about the smart grid. It is the future. Our local utility here, NV Energy, is actively engaged in that. What's so smart about the smart grid?
You know, the smart grid is the glue. It's the nexus. It's the centerpiece that makes all these other things possible that we want. So if we want renewable energy at scale, we've got to have a smart grid because renewables are typically intermittent and variable, and our grid can't handle that if we push a bunch of that on it at once. If we want electric transportation, we've got to have a smart grid to handle all that charging, or again, it'll overwhelm the system. And on and on. All of these other things we want require a smart grid at the center.
So to the extent that transportation plays a significant role in this, I believe that there is a provision in the McKinsey report of '07 that says that transportation is potentially the least cost approach to our reduction of greenhouse gases. Jim, weigh in and tell me what you think. I'm sorry, I have two Jims. Jim Motivali.
Yeah, I think we're on a track to electrify transportation. And if you look at the average electric car, it's called a zero-emission car. But people are properly skeptical about zero emission because there are emissions associated with creating the electricity in that vehicle. So how clean the grid is and how we generate the electricity is very important to the well-to-wheels equation of that car. So if you're in a very, very clean grid, or you generate totally from renewable sources like wind or solar, you really do have a zero-emission cars. But if you generate mostly from coal, it's really quite a lot dirtier. In fact, if you generate wholly from coal, you're probably looking about the emissions profile of a Toyota Prius. It is not really zero emissions. So what we do with the grid is extremely important in this regard. And you also have to say that hybrids and plug-in hybrids, which I think in some ways will be the bulk of the electrified vehicles we're going to see in the near future. None of those are zero emissions. But they're all very dependent on what happens with the grid. And another thing that's very interesting is the phenomenon we call clustering, which is we're quite likely to see the early electric vehicles concentrated in certain neighborhoods. Like the zip code might be 90210. You might expect to see a lot of them there. And you know, as I mentioned, the first Fisker Karma is going to Leonardo DiCaprio, and I'm sure his neighbors will have one too. So the problem with the grid right now is we can't really tell if there's an overload on a transmitter or transformer locally, we can't really tell what caused it. That's how dumb our grid is, and that's what goes back to Thomas Edison and that kind of thing. So with a smart grid, we will know exactly what caused it. And you have utilities now that are planning for electric vehicle deployment and are beefing up local transformers and putting in smart meters and getting it so that they can tell instantly what kind of load they have so we don't have overload. And what I was talking about earlier, V2G, or vehicle to grid, is all part of that. And I think we're going to see more of that in the near future.
So as we talk about our clean energy future, we talk about innovation. But perhaps in our economic condition, we ought to be talking about what it's going to take to create jobs. This is an important topic, and because this panel is focused on providing information to consumers, perhaps each of you can give me a sense of what you think those opportunities might be going forward. Where shall I begin? Okay, Jesse.
Well, I think I'll talk from the smart grid point of view, my area of expertise. It's already creating thousands of jobs. This was just documented again in a report a few months ago from Duke University, and they pinpointed some of the hot spots around the country that are really getting. But I think one of the things we need to do, and that's to follow the guidance of Secretary Chu, which is we need to become leaders in this. We need to act now. We need that early mover advantage, because that's when the jobs will come, and that's when we can export to other countries. So we can clean up our own backyard and then export what we've invented to the rest of the world.
Yes, Jim.
Well, there's an excellent example of this with lithium-ion battery production. Right now, we're poised to see almost all the jobs in that area go to Asia, and particularly China and Korea. And what President Obama did by putting $2.4 billion into advanced battery development was to try to retain some part of that market for the U.S. And there's an attempt to create a concentrated battery market, in particular in Michigan. More than half of the money invested as part of that $2.4 billion went to, I think, 11 companies in Michigan. So Michigan is the center for American auto development, and it should probably be the center for American lithium-ion manufacturing also. Right now, and as Secretary Chu made this point quite forcefully, and I've heard him do it before also, if we don't gain some kind of advantage in this field, we're going to lose it totally to Asia.
Yes, Roger.
Just to give you an encouraging picture, remember how I talked about how there was a product that was designed for many of the buildings here, and it was designed specifically for energy efficiency as part of this effort to save, I think it's 50 million gallons of water. In any case, it's now available more broadly. And if you come to the convention that we have every year, you can walk through 3 football fields of new technologies that are part of what happens when people are building these green buildings, whole new industries, whole new cycles of innovation. So it's a very, very encouraging sort of oasis in the midst of a lot of disturbing news.
So Chandra, very briefly.
Oh boy, that'll be hard for me. Okay, very briefly. Obviously, I talked a little bit in my presentation about some of the things that can be done for job creation. But, you know, being up here as, I guess, one of the smaller businesses from some of these huge folks that are up here that are doing such incredible work, I can tell you that the small businesses of this nation are hiring. I think sometimes it's just a branding issue. Our United Streetcar, whether it's welders, fitters, machinists, as I said, designers, if you go out and look, some of this is a branding issue. There are jobs there, and there is growth markets when you look at these like Wave and Streetcar, as I talked about. So I would just encourage everyone that I do believe there is optimism out there. I do believe there are jobs there. Sometimes you may have to look a little harder, but they are there, and they're throughout all sectors of the economy. Thank you.
And the final word.
I get the final word?
You get the final word.
I don't at the board meetings. It's all about education, I believe. If businesses demand companies to care about sustainability, if consumers demand where they stay in their hotels, where they travel, they demand to know what companies are doing about sustainability, it's going to motivate companies to make the kind of changes we're making. We spend $300 million a year on capital expenditures outside of the new properties we build. And we've incubated companies, design companies, vendors to focus in this area. People book conferences here at ARIA because it's the largest conference center in the United States that's received a gold certification from LEED. People care about that. And if you can communicate out to the consumer and to the business population that this is important and you want to invest and reward companies that care about this, you create jobs as we have here.
Thank you. Thank you to the panel, and thank you to you.